And we're live. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Stripe Developer Office Hours. My name is Cecil, developer advocate here at Stripe. And this is where we talk about all the cool and amazing things that are happening within the Stripe developer community. Today, I have a special guest. I have Jeff Bull from Orkes, who's going to be talking to us about how we can build workflows and orchestrations and build those out using like events that get generated from your Stripe account. So Jeff, why don't you come off of mute and let us know a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Oh yeah, totally, dude. And thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. My name is Jeff. I like long walks on the beach. I like building lists. Sorry, that was very cheesy. I apologize. So yeah, Jeff Bull. I'm the developer community manager at orchestration.io. A little bit about me is, I was telling somebody on a call earlier today, or like a video conversation earlier, that when they were asking like why, like they're like, oh, I like your space. Like, how'd you decide to build all this out? I'm like, I didn't really. Like, it was more of like, I have all this nerdy stuff, like my Star Wars bobbleheads and my 3D printer and comic books. I'm like, I needed a place to put it. So it kind of ended up here. So this is what you would want to know about me. Like, I love Star Wars. This says Star Wars in Arabesh. I love comic books. I love fantasy. I love 3D printing. I like all this. I have my sewing machine is sitting right here next to me. Like,
you have a sewing machine?
Right there. I make Star Wars cosplay, and I've been making a shirt for my son. I have ADHD, so I'm like, I always kind of like a hobby hop. So I'm always trying to find something else to do that like occupies my hands and my brain while I'm active. But yeah, I like to create stuff. I like to make things happen, which I think is what made me gravitate to working at a company like Orkes, because that's largely what like the product is, but what the community is doing is like trying to build these new and interesting things. And our platform really kind of makes that, like, I'm kind of like I should be burying the lead a little bit more for later in the conversation, but like it kind of makes that a little bit easier. So we'll get back to that stuff later. But yeah, I'm just stoked to be here. It's going to be super fun to chat with everyone.
Yeah, man. Really glad that you can join us. And the fact that you said that, because my mind is gone now. Like, I'm thinking about all kinds of other stuff. Mm-hmm. So because you work at a company that does orchestration, do you have any personal orchestrations that you do with your product in your personal life?
Oh,
like,
dude.
Do you have like, okay, I got to set off these alarms and I got to plug this into my calendar? Like, do you do that with the product yourself or not?
It's super funny that you asked that. So one of our tech writers / kind of developer advocates wrote a blog and then made a video on this a while back where she actually built a workflow that basically orchestrates a simple app that does the kind of like someone joins your community or joins Slack, and you could do an automatic reach out saying, hey, welcome to the community. We've all felt that if we join any Slack channel, what have you. And so rather than turning it up just to show an option for doing this, rather than turning on the feature in Slack and just building that there under your profile, she created a workflow to do it. So I went and played with that and set it up. Now I use another tool for doing like messaging, but I turned that on for a bit because I'm like, cool, I want to use this like simple workflow as a way to like reach out to somebody automatically. I can just, I saw this thing happen. I can just use that. I don't have to go in and do it. But the thing that I have actually been playing around with, and this makes me a total nerd and I love it, is if anyone's familiar with Brandon Sanderson, he's an author, and books like Mistborn or the Stormlight Archives. He has this huge world building around the Cosmere. That's his like fantasy thing. They're kind of behind me. You can't see them, but they're back here. Sure. In one of the sets of books, in the context of that series, women write and write letters and stuff, but men, it's like not culturally acceptable to write. They don't learn how to write. They can speak, but they might write in glyphs. And so what I've been starting to do is build my first API by creating something similar to the site. I think it's called swapi.dev, which is the Star Wars API.
Oh,
so it's
a
Star Wars API. Yeah. So I'm building I want to build a Cosmere API that is, I shouldn't be telling it because everyone else is going to probably build this, or it may even be something out there, but I wanted to try to make it myself where there is a API that you can go out there and it's all built. The app is built and orchestrated by Conductor. So that what you can do is call this API anytime you want to, similar to like the wiki, to get like stuff back and write glyphs or whatever out of this. But yes, I'm building the app right now, and I'm building out parts of the workflow on Conductor as I do it to kind of see how they play. Yeah, and I'm thinking about making a video series off of it for Orkes as a way to show like how easy it is to actually make this happen when you have something simple in place like Conductor. But yeah, it's super fun. That's what I'm trying to do at the moment.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, I always find it fun, particularly as developer advocates, when you could take the product and then just create like these fun experiments like with it. Because I think you're doing two things, right? Like one, you're dog fooding your product, right? And you're trying to bend it and twist it to do things that like, your company probably didn't think it was going to do. And then two, you get to kind of mesh your work life and your personal life together, which for me just
100%.
sounds like a win-win on both sides. But
Oh,
anyway,
totally.
I don't want to dive too much into it because I'll go off on a tangent and we'll talk for like 10 hours about it.
Yeah, I mean, actually, but just to add on, just to inject a little piece on that, like
Sure.
you are totally right, and especially for someone like with my personality type, I tend to my work and my personal life, like there's the third space thing over here, but my work and my personal life tend to like bleed into each other constantly because that's just
Yeah.
it's the person I am. So, like to your point, using this for that purpose is also like good. It's a way to kind of like connect me and be more passionate about the work that I do, while
Sure.
also like making this benefit the things I don't just turn off at 5 o'clock and I move on. So it's kind of neat to have this like crossover where they're almost mutually beneficial for each other.
Yeah, no, I got you. All right, so I really want to dive in and talk to you about Orkes. But before we do that, I'm going to share my screen. We're just going to go through a quick round of updates, just kind of talking about what's been going on in the community, what are some of the things that we've done since we met the last time, which was last week, just around the world of Stripe. So I'm just going to pull up my screen super quick, and let's have a little quick chit chat about some of the things that we have been doing. All right, so hopefully folks can see my screen right now. Actually, no, I haven't shared it yet. 1 second. Let's bring this up. There we go. So last week is what it was. The Reality of Product Design podcast featured Natasha Wu. And now she is a designer here at Stripe. And so they had a really interesting conversation about like, has big tech killed design and creativity? So this is a really fun podcast. Definitely recommend that you folks go ahead and listen to it and kind of listen to what a designer at Stripe is thinking about as we, build products and services and, user experiences for different folks here. It's available here on YouTube. So, go ahead and make sure you take a look at that. And then next coming up, we have a blog post. This one is on Medium from Sachin. And so it looks like Sachin's creating a little series here, talking about key concepts and payment flows using Stripe payment integration. So if folks are interested in kind of like following the series and, kind of listen to Sachin's, thoughts and perspectives about what it feels like to build stuff for Stripe, definitely recommend that you check that out. And then over on the AWS blog, let me accept this GDPR thing. Over on the AWS blog, there is a blog post, kind of like a little bit of a collaboration between the folks at Stripe and some of the folks at AWS about streamlining financial operations and using Stripe event destinations. I thought this was particularly interesting to highlight because today we're going to be talking about events with Orkes. But here you can also see, how we can do some of these things with AWS and Amazon EventBridge, which I think is also pretty cool. And last but not least, hot off the presses, we just decided to kickstart a new stripe.dev page over on LinkedIn. You folks have been amazing on LinkedIn and showing us a lot of love. Oops, let me close that. And so now we created this, stripe.dev page. So we're going to be posting a lot of updates, blog posts, events, videos we're putting up, and office hour streams and things of that nature. So definitely recommend folks go ahead and follow it. Oh, look at this. Like I'm not even following it myself. So there you go. Go ahead and follow it. And so you can see some of the cool things that we're doing here at Stripe. So that's our updates for now. If folks that are watching, if you're building, any cool integrations, open source projects, blog posts, videos, if you're working with Stripe yourself and you have anything that you want us to share and highlight, definitely let us know. And we'll do our best to go ahead and put it up here. Now, I'm going to stop sharing really quick, and we're going to go back to hanging out with Jeff. And for folks that are watching too, we're doing this live, right? So if you have any questions, comments, concerns, anything of the sort, go ahead and drop it in the chat. I'll make sure I try and get them, to Jeff, and we'll talk about them online. Also, if you're, wherever you're watching from, definitely let us know where you are. Last week I know we had folks from Brazil and India and Qatar. We had folks from North and South America. We had folks from all over the place. So for those of you that are here that are hanging out with us, definitely let us know where you're watching from. What are you up to? And what is some of the cool stuff that you're building here? Okay, now we got that out of the way. Let's get into Orkes. So Jeff, why don't we just start at the beginning? Right? Like what is Orkes?
In the beginning with it. No, I'm sorry. That was terrible. I'm gonna stop doing those things. I keep thinking in my head, like this would be great to be like in a world. Okay. So sort of like the superhero origin story of Orkes and specifically of Conductor. If you think in the Wayback Machine, just imagine the screen's going warbly and we're having a fade out to a backstory or montage here. back in the day when Netflix was still primarily a DVD, rental shop, there was a time period where they were like, okay, for the business to kind of grow, and I'm obviously paraphrasing, but the business to really get where they want it to be, original content was going to be something they're going to need to explore. In order to do that, they'd have to have a whole new platform. It was also about a time when microservice, like the term microservices, wasn't really something that was part of the lexicon. Like developers were actively building small service-based stuff, but that's not really how, at the time, how most applications were being developed. Like it wasn't like the most common way to do it, even at that point. And so something needed to be created at Netflix in order to create this scalable platform, or almost middleware, if you want to think about it that way, to allow for big applications to be called, and whatever this was going to turn into would be able to grow and thrive. And so two of our co-founders were there, and this project is largely their brainchild. And so they built out what we know as Conductor today. So for years, you would find it on GitHub as Netflix Conductor. And then eventually, kind of in the without going through the TLDR here, when our co-founders moved on, did some other stuff, ended up coming back and saying we're going to create a enterprise version of this, which I'll get to in a minute. Netflix said, hey, it's time for us to kind of back off of the open source thing and being the stewards. Would you guys like to take it? So our co-founders like, yeah, we'll become the stewards of that. And everything was kind of shuffled over to what is now referred to as just the Conductor open source project. So if you go to, and I think you've got the lower thirds, and if you can show them cool, is sure. You can either go to just go straight to GitHub right there on the screen. Conductor OSS is the org. And if you go in there, you'll see the repo called Conductor. That is the actual open source project, originally called Netflix. And you'll even see some of the nomenclature and a lot of the Java import commands and stuff in there, dependencies still have the term Netflix in them in some cases. They're getting rolled through over time, but they're not something that was prioritized to change, but you'll still see some of those remnants in there. You could also go to conductor-oss.org. There we go, thank you, dude, which is kind of like the open source foundation version of the page, where you can go there and get started, and it links to its own docs, which are built out of the docs in the GitHub repo. There's also a link to the Orkes events and things like that. So that's Conductor basically. So Conductor is this, if anyone's not ever played with Conductor or Orkes Conductor, however you want to think about it, Conductor is a workflow orchestration tool at its base. It's like, to me, it's like one of those things where it's easy to say that's what it is, and what you can do with it is almost boundless. One of the ways I think about it, because it's almost chaotic thinking, but it gives you a sense of how expansive it can be, is my son will come to me sometimes and say, hey, Dad, let's draw something. Yeah, great. Hands me a blank sheet of paper. He takes a blank sheet and he just starts going. And I look at it and go, oh, crap, what do I do? What do I want to draw? What's my idea? Conductor is almost that. But I mean it in the best possible way, that it almost gives you that blank slate to say, cool, we've simplified all these glue code type things in the middle to really make it easy to orchestrate whatever workflow you need that is your business process or your application flow. So you can just build all the components you need to make your app really awesome. And this is just going to make it simple to call all that stuff. So it is the Conductor. It's, similar to other workflow orchestration tools, except, obviously much better, clearly. But the whole purpose of it is to make it as easy as possible for you as a developer who's building individual services or building an entire app to either visually or through code build your workflow to call all the services necessary to make your app work. And the thing that's really interesting about it is that, and they thought ahead a lot about this, is, you can do event-driven tasks, of course. But one of the big pieces of it is the human task. We have a whole mechanism for human tasks speaking of Stripe and the different things that payment processing, that's too simple of a word. The payment processing, just the space is a big, big thing. But thinking of payment processing in Stripe, there's a lot of necessity in the payment space, whether you're an individual retailer or, a barista at a small cart coffee shop, or, some big company, whatever it is, where a human has to be in the loop to do a thing. The server is tapping a button, or the person here's there's a person there. So it's not just completely automated in all cases. Some, yes, many, no. And so having the ability to have human-centric tasks in there, where you're no, I know at this point right here, a human is going to need to initiate something or some things. We need to have that. That's one of the biggest components that stands out for our workflow platform relative to others people might have used, is the ability to not have to go build that or try to think about a workaround and how to make that happen. it's just a component of Conductor. It's just there. You just invoke it, and then you have it call your code, and you're good to go. So that's kind of the whole origin story in a nutshell. There's obviously a lot more nuance to it, but the cool part about it is Conductor open source is not going anywhere. Some companies might call that their community version. You could refer to it as that. We just like to call it the open source version because anyone can contribute. That is the bulk of where our community members are, is working with open source, because it's so easy to get. Like, if you go to the repo right now, go to Conductor, clone it. If you have Docker, as long as you have Docker installed in JDK 17, which either of those won't take very long to spin up anyway, but for any dev, you probably have something like that. You could have that thing up and running. I clocked it at like 2.5 minutes, and it's, once you do Gradle build, once you do Gradle run and Gradle build, it's just done. Like, it's just running, and you have a GUI and you have the API, and you can start building workflows. I mean, it's just, it spins up really fast. So the point I'm trying to make is it's really accessible to get into and get started. So many individual developers and businesses are like, we just need something. Oh, Conductor, we can just go grab it, and in just a moment we'll have it running, and we can just kind of start building from there. So
like, the main thing that I need, because I'm guessing it's not necessary, right? But like, if I have Docker, right? As long as I have Docker, Docker compose file, Docker compose up, spins up what I need, and now I can just start jamming and working stuff in the machine.
That's it.
But if I wanted to, because I'm guessing this is possible too, and it sounds like you said Gradle file, so I'm guessing this is built on Java. If folks have like JDK installed and those types of things on their machine, they could also just like build the project.
100%. I'm sorry. I should have, I apologize. I was kind of blending things in my mind because we get too far ahead. You are correct. And actually the README that I updated recently for it is, yes, once you clone the repo, the step you would take is just do the Docker compose, and it spins the whole thing up, and you're just up and running. And then, yes, if you want to build it from source, then you could do the other things as well. But neither of them take very long to spin up. It goes up pretty quick. Yeah, and actually, one notice we made a change recently because someone called it out, and actually I noticed it too. Was if you were on a Mac, when you would spin the thing up, this is just a good way to expose that, like, this is cool about open source is like, we find something cool, let's just go tweak it and make sure it works. Is the web port locally, it would turn up for the GUI, wouldn't work initially. And we found out that the port it was defaulting to, I think, was 5,000, or at least that's what had been originally created. And apparently on the newer Macs, I think it's AirPlay or AirDrop runs natively on that port already. And so, and you can't stop that. You can't change that, probably not very easily. So we're like, no worries. Let's just go. We'll just tweak that in the build files, and then it just comes up on a new port. So that was something that, like, I noticed, and then someone else was like, oh, hey, it's this. And we just tweak that. And so now it just spins up, and you're good.
Yeah, I want us to go back about that conversation around workflows, because the whole workflow thing is really interesting to me. And for folks that are watching, so Stripe emits a lot of events, right? Like, if you kind of think about what Stripe is as a platform for managing like your financial integrations, right? Like, I always tell folks, Stripe is not a thing that runs in your app, but it runs alongside it. And so with us running alongside it, and you want to know, okay, well, what happened, right? What happened? Was it a successful payment? Did we create a customer? Did tax things happen? Were invoices paid? Right? Like, how do those things happen, and they happen proactively? Like, we shoot out all of these types of events, right? And so we have a lot of customers that ask us about, how can I manage my events? Like, what's a good architecture for doing these types of things? And it just so happened, our DevRel team, we were at Chicago a few months ago at a conference, and I met the Orkes folks, and I was like, oh, this is perfect. And so they were kind of showing me, obviously, how they build up orchestrations and workflows, things of that nature. But the thing that was most interesting to me about your product versus some of the other ones that I've seen is your ability to go in and out of code, right?
Oh, yeah.
So you can have a visual designer, and I'll show demos in a little while, but you can have a visually designed workflow, but you can write it in code as well, right? So, like, you have the option to do one or the other. And that's why I kind of chose the title, like, Workflows for Everyone, because I think about it as, I don't have to necessarily be a developer to create workflows for this business, right?
Yes.
Like, I could be a VA, or I could be, a non, programming person, member of the team, right? And be able to contribute or even validate that, based on these requirements that I got, this is what's supposed to happen. And I can kind of just look, like, I can visually look at the designer.
Oh, dude, I'm a little hot here. Like, you're speaking my language, man. Oh, I love this. Like, you're just like, here, I'm just going to tee you up for all the things.
There you go. You got
so much. There's so much, like, break out of that. But yes, specifically that last one of the points, one of the points you made there around the idea of workflows for everyone. I had a really cool conversation the other day with somebody internally, and it got me thinking that, oh my gosh, this is such a great way to think about. You said be as someone who's a BA or business architect, or someone who does business process management, or like everyone, here's the acronym BPMN. The idea that, and I'll pull it up in a second and show people kind of visually just what you can kind of expect to see. The idea of having a visual aid to see what a workflow looks like. And more specifically, that if anyone's worked with workflow building at all, what you will know is that the workflow you're looking at is not code. Every step in that workflow does not contain any code. It is a step that is saying, almost if you're a person who's not done a lot of development or not built workflows, if you've used IFTTT or Zapier, one of those, it's just a thing that says, when this happens, then go do this, then go do this. Maybe here's a fork, or here's a join, or a do while loop. But it's a series of steps that says, if this happens, then go do this thing. And if that doesn't work, then go do this thing, or call this other webhook for Stripe, or whatever it is. It just, here's the next set of steps you're going to do. And when that doesn't work the way it's supposed to, we know that, go do this other thing instead. And so having the ability to, one, have a visual aid makes it so that your earlier in career folks who are just learning on your team, really easy. If you have business process managers or BAs, it's great, because it also in that regard helps. And what I really want to experiment with and talk with people more about is, how can we showcase that can help break down barriers in communication between people who are business process folks, who are, let's say, supply chain, who design, here's how this needs to work, but they're not writing code, they're designing, but they know that this is how this business needs to flow for this supply chain function. And that's, if anyone's around supply chain, like, that's a highly complex thing that has to be led that way. If you had a developer lead the design of that, it would not work properly. No offense to any developer, but like, you need to understand the semantics of how the business side needs to operate. Then someone can say, I'll develop each service or component that would serve at that point in the chain. But what I love about the visual representation is somebody who is a developer will understand what this is telling them to do. Oh yeah, you're going to invoke my code here, this service goes here, whatever. But the business person can look at it and also go, yeah, no, I understand, because each of these steps are the process I'm working with, which makes conversations around design or optimization or even troubleshooting flow better, because now those separate languages they each talk can have a place where they sort of, that Venn diagram kind of meets in the middle, so they at least have some commonality that they can have a discussion about, which to me, that is a value that I think does not get talked about nearly often enough. And for somebody who comes from a networking background, like Cisco routing, switching type stuff, that's the hardest part of it. The joke is always like, it's not the network, but it's because people don't know how to communicate with you about what they're actually experiencing and what you do. If you can have that commonality in the middle, it just makes things so much easier. And then to touch on the, like, doing this as code, yes, you can either do it as, and I'll show it to you in a second, just go manipulate the JSON or write your own. It's just a JSON file basically, and you can manipulate it all you want to, either in the tool or write it and paste it. You can also just use the APIs. If you just want to, if you don't ever want to go into the interface and you just want to use the APIs to orchestrate all of it, you can do all of that through the API too, and just your pipeline tools, whatever it happens to be. So it gives you the flexibility to do this in whatever way makes sense for you and your teams, or in multiple ways. And so that I'm not just talking, do you mind if I throw up my screen here real quick?
Yeah, let's do it. It's
Okay,
demo
sweet.
time. I'm going to bring your screen up really quick, and let's kind of see how some of this stuff looks like.
Awesome. Welcome to Orkes Conductor. It's magic. It's all kinds of magic. I'm right now, it defaulted to the under the executions. Actually, let me zoom in just a tiny bit.
Hold on, but before you go, I don't mean to cut you off, but before you go,
No, you're fine.
So right now, right, because we talked a little bit just now about like getting started and folks being able to spin up a container really quick. What you're showing here, is this something running on your machine, or is this like the whole segment that you're showing?
Great question. So we'll take a step back in the world of Conductor. Conductor open source is something you run locally, or you put it on your own server. That's how it's run. Okay. Orkes Conductor, so Conductor under the Orkes brand, is the enterprise offering. And the primary way that we do this for customers is it's a SaaS offering. So you're running this right here that you're seeing is running in the cloud. You can kind of ignore oh yeah, you're not seeing the URL, so that's good. This is just kind of a demo environment that from one of our engineers, but the production environment looks identical to this. And it's hosted in the cloud. But as you can imagine, that does not work for all businesses. There are plenty of reasons for a need to either run it containerized or what have you locally in your own environment, whether you're in certain industries like healthcare, where HIPAA is a factor, or if you're in government entities where FedRAMP might be a thing you have to deal with. So yes, we have a complete way that we have a number of customers that run that locally in their own environments for those purposes. It's still Orkes Conductor. They're still getting updates and stuff. We still support it. It just runs locally, in some cases even air gapped because it needs to, because there's no choice. They don't have an option in those things.
Got it.
Yeah. So all that's an option. This is where we start. And I would say that's usually where people land, at least to begin with, unless they have, from what I've noticed, a clear problem to solve, which is we have certain compliance things that need to be met and they can't be met through this. Okay, so we'll do it differently. Or we're FedRAMP. Sorry, we can't have it in the cloud. Okay, like that. I don't want to tell everyone here that, by the way, that we are completely FedRAMP certified. I'm not positive, but I'm making that example because in those cases where there are very strict guidelines around what can and cannot be done for those companies or those organizations, we can help accommodate for that. And we're very aware of it because that is a known quantity out there. But yes, to circle back, this is the cloud hosted version. So if you went to orkes.io right now, there's a big button on the front that says start for free. You click on that, sign up for a free developer account. And what you'll land in is our developer sandbox. We call it Developer Edition. It's a free sandbox environment. We recently made an update to it probably a month ago where we changed the platform a tiny bit so that it's now allows for each individual developer to have their own namespace. So previously you'd log in and it's demo stuff, but you could be seeing changes happening from any developer playing with it. And now when you log in, it's yours. You can do whatever you want with it. You can build, there's a couple limitations, like you can have one application running, but have as many workflows as you want and tasks and all those sorts of things. And all the other features that are involved, they're all there for you to just go play with. The API is available, integrations, whatever you want. So any developer, just go to orkes.io. If you're interested in playing with the Orkes version of this, orkes.io, click the big start for free button. That's it. You're not signing up for like a free trial or whatever. This is just the sandbox environment and you can build and play as much as you'd like to.
Gotcha. Okay.
That's it. So all I wanted to show here is I just want to give people the idea that when I'm in this, you can see there's menu items on the left and there's a number. I don't really need to go through them for this context. I just wanted you to see that it started on the executions page, which just means that tagged on this on workflow. This just means that these things in this list are workflows that have been executed, and you can just see the start time and whether they completed or failed. That's all this is. You could click on under definitions. I could click on workflow to see the list of the actual workflows and go into the config that way. But this is the home screen you would see. We'll just go here. I just want to give everyone kind of an example of some of the things that Cecil and I were talking about a moment ago. I'm going to click on this top workflow ID. And so this was a previous execution of this particular workflow called invoice claim, but I don't need to worry about that part too much. I wanted to show everyone, this is what we call the workflow visualizer. So this is just a visual representation of your workflow. I will zoom it out a tiny bit so you can get a better sense of it, but pretty straightforward. The workflow starts here. Obviously it says start. Then you kind of scroll down in it and you can see a variety of different things are now happening. Like, these different types of, not tasks, but sort of actions are happening before a task does occur. Here's a task, and you can see the word. If I zoom back in a tiny bit so it's easier to read. On this one right here, you can see the word human. It's called invoice approval. So I think you can probably all guess, in this case of an invoice claim process, in this invoice approval step requires a human to be in the loop. Speaking of Stripe type things, where we want a human to actually click on something. So this task right here would then call some code that could, in this case, potentially invoke a webhook over to Stripe or something else that requires somebody to hit a payment or approve button or something. And then the task can move forward from there. And it can move into the next phase, which goes into this last step, which is process the payment. You can see it's just making a GET request to a URL, and then the workflow ends. And that's it. It's very straightforward at that point. Obviously, this is not a terribly complex workflow, but it gives you a good example of like things that can be done and how they can be done. And the reason I wanted to show it this way, this right here is called a switch task or switch case. The reason I wanted to show this is because you can already see that in this visualizer, two things are happening. One is we're getting a sense of what things have to be then invoked code-wise or integration-wise from this point, which we'll come back to in a moment, but also from the business process perspective or a system architecture perspective. This gives anybody looking at this a much better sense of what is this either application or this piece of the application actually doing. You don't even need to look at the code to know. I mean, I would say we all probably guess this, like documentation is key and naming things is really critical. So if you don't name things well, It could be very complicated to sort out, but with names like access threshold and invoice approval, you can get a pretty good sense of like, what is this probably doing in the business flow overall? And then from there, you could click on a task like this. Now, this is showing me the runtime stuff, and you can look at the input information, but we could go into that task configuration and view what it is from there. I'm going to stop for a second. Cecil, does that kind of make sense of like from a visualization perspective?
Yeah, totally. And kind of like what you said, like I'm looking at it and I'm thinking about like the different patterns that I'm already seeing in it. Like, so I can see like the first one, and like you said, I think you called it a case, but I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, okay, I can have conditions, right? Like if this meets the condition, I'm going to go to the left side, I'm going to go to the right side.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? I can see that I have obviously like different blocks of things that are there. And also I think the human interaction part that you mentioned is also pretty interesting.
Yep.
It's not only like a code focused workflow. It's not like a, hey, I trigger some event in my Stripe account and this thing just kind of runs wild. But there's also, we can implement checks and balances in the middle if we need to, so that like a actual person comes in and like looks at the invoice, confirms the contract, signs the document, whatever the case is, and kind of keep things moving based on like whatever it is that we need that process to do.
Absolutely. And the key point, I said everything you said is accurate. And the key tenet that's underneath all of that is that let me go back to it because we're still talking about it, right? I was going to show you a different example, but I'll go back to this. The core tenet of what you're describing is this can be as complex or as simple as it needs to be, depending on the action. And this is where like business process design but really including system design or, solutions design comes into play, because yes, could you have this one workflow have like 50 steps in it and all these different conditional things? Yeah, sure, absolutely. You could always do that. But now you start to see, oh, wait, we're getting back into that sort of like classic monolithic application world. And that's really not what we want. What we want is to break down individual steps and individual processes that only have a couple things that need to happen for them to be successful into their own flow. Now, you mentioned earlier, like doing this in code, what have you. If I click on the JSON tab, this is the workflow. So the workflow is just a flat JSON file. So everything you saw in this diagram is just here in JSON. You scroll down and you can see here's the app name, here's the latest status, here's the first task type, it's a switch task, who created it, here's all the information about retry counts and start times and all that. But this is a post workflow execution. I can show you the version of this when we're configuring the workflow, but it looks the same. Like it's just a big JSON file. So you can just, if you write that separately, you can just copy and paste it and drop it in here. And as soon as you do that and hit save, it appears in the diagram exactly as it is. So or the workflow visualizer. This is intended to make it so you can configure the workflow from this visual, but it's also serves before that as a really good way to validate, did I actually build out what I intended to build out? Is this going to do what I intended it to do? Because if you do this and you're like, oh, it didn't actually lay out the way I wanted, you can change it from here. Like under the definition, I'll go to definitions in a minute where we change this, but you will see the little buttons and clicks and stuff that we can do to say, click, you know what, I'm going to add a task right there. Anyone can come in and say, I'll click this workflow and just switch to a different workflow to give us a sense of it. Could come here and say, look, I've got these little buttons that let me interact. At any time I say, cool, add another task right here. I realize that we need to add another task at this step. And the moment you configure it, like add a worker task and this window pops up, I save these things. The moment that I do that, we'll go back inside the workflow definition itself, under code, it would appear in the code. Like the moment that I add it to the visualizer, it would just appear in the JSON, which tells us also that if I just want to write that new thing and I know where it goes, I could just come into here in the JSON, insert it in with the right, with the right nomenclature, hit save, and it would appear. Like it doesn't, you are welcome to interchangeably use those things, including if you did this with the API and you invoke the API right now from your workstation to this, the instant you did that, it would just appear in the visualizer and you just have it. So it makes it really easy for multiple people, multiple skill levels and multiple backgrounds to interface with something that tells them what is actually happening, why it's happening, and then even help troubleshoot it.
Got it. So you've shown us so far, the JSON and kind of like the actual state, right? I'm guessing that's what the JSON represents, right? Like this is the current state of what the workflow is, like the steps, the start to the complete, execution time, all that types of stuff, and then like those branches that it has inside of it. Let's talk about triggers. Like, what are some of the things that you have that trigger the workflow to start working? Because obviously the workflow is just kind of sitting and waiting for us to like tell it to do something.
Right. So there's a couple. I should say a couple. There's a whole bunch of ways to do that. The simplest thing that you could say would be, this is a workflow where we're just going to start it manually. We come in here and hold on, click on. So I'm in. Sorry, I need to get my bearings for a sec. I'm in the definitions section of Orkes, and for the sake of this part of the showing, I'm going to minimize these different menus. So I'm in the definitions area. You can also see there's a massive button here that says run workflow. So if you just land anywhere, you can click run workflow wherever you are, and it would just allow you to execute that workflow. What you can also do, and what happens, I think, or I've seen more frequently, is here, I'm clicked on the workflow tab. I've built this thing out. I want to run this to see what happens. On the right-hand side of the visualizer, it could be collapsed. If you expand it up here where it says open panel, it just gives you, here's the full workflow definition. Here's individual tasks that you're on right now. Code is showing you the code version, the JSON version of the entire workflow. So it's either the visualizer, the GUI with all the fields that you can add all the parameters and stuff you want, and go to code and see what that look like. Then you can click on run. And when you're on the run tab, you get this screen. And this is where you can manipulate your input parameters and things of that nature. So if this is a task where you're like, I just want to run this and see what happens right now, I'm not going to wait for whatever trigger, where everything is calling it automatically. I just want to see if this is doing what I want. I come here, and whatever input parameters I'm supposed to provide in this workflow, you type them here, and then you would hit the run. As soon as I type in something, whatever, and save it, what would end up happening is the run workflow button would become available. I'd hit run, and it would execute the workflow. And what you would see is it visually going through the workflow on the screen. It would say, I'm running, and each step as it completes would highlight in green and then check off. If it failed, it would highlight in red with a big red X and tell you this step failed. You could click on it and see where it failed and what the reason for it was. So that is the most rudimentary version of, like, I want to run a workflow and see what happens.
Right.
But from a trigger perspective, literally anything could be a trigger. It could be a webhook that is published that says a system out there is doing something else, and it sends a message back. And when that happens, this particular workflow kicks off. It could be another workflow. Most often what I think I'm seeing is you're building out an app, and the app isn't just one big workflow. It's a collection of a whole bunch of different workflows that are small, like this, or that first one I showed, where it's just a handful of things that are being done. And these in here would then say, like, hey, maybe this one right here isn't calling some code. It's actually invoking a sub workflow. So you're actually in the sub workflow is just another workflow, but it happens to be something that relies on this thing to contact it. Its only purpose in life is to take direction from something else telling it. And you would just click here and say, add a sub workflow task. And then it gives you a thing, and you build out your separate workflow, and it's over here. It could be code that is initiating that. So the trigger, it's almost even easier to say that, to ask you the question, what would you like to trigger this workflow? And if the answer is, I'd like this, whatever this is, we would just say yes. Because at the end of the day, the workflow is just an initiation of a set of steps that are going to happen. And not all of those steps have to invoke a bit of code or a microservice you have running in your environment. It could invoke a webhook to a third-party integration, for example. I'll click on integrations just to show the visual of this, because we have a lot of them pretty made in here, but you can integrate anything you want to. Discard those changes. I'll just go here. So in this person's, this is a bunch of this person has created. We'll ignore those for now. I'm going to click on the button that says new integration at the top to show you the kind of the menu that you can look at. Let me close these just so you can get a summary real quick. But today, these are a bunch of things that we have already in here. So if you're wanting to do a lot of AI-based things where you're prompting and querying a language model someplace that's doing something for you as part of your workflow, you would just expand this and literally say, I want OpenAI. Okay, click add. You give the integration a name. Once you've done this, the integration is available for you to invoke from a task. You just say, create a task that calls this integration. I've connected it. I just gave it an API key, and it's done. It's just built out for you. So these are the ones we've built out already, and we're adding more as customers and people ask for them. But that's the pre-built stuff. But honestly, if you didn't have a pre-built one, you could just create a new one of the options in yours is just create a new integration from scratch, or you could just set a task that says call this external API. I think we have a get started template, or we used to, that was an example of building a notification system for an outage or an issue that would contact you could either do PagerDuty or I forget what the other one was we had an example of, but just invokes PagerDuty. And one of the tasks is essentially contact the PagerDuty webhook and send it a message. Send it this thing, which triggered an alert on that side. So the task itself in Conductor, there's no code in it. It's just when this happened, or the code really is like, here's the API, send this string of information. Great. You set something up in PagerDuty, and now that fires off an alert. And then the workflow moves on from there. Sends off of this thing, and then the workflow moves to the next step. It's a pretty simple thing. So at the end of the day, what we're looking at in this platform is less of how am I building out my code and much more of how do you want this application to work?
So you know what I'm going to ask you, right?
Oh, I can imagine a bunch of things. But
I'm going to ask you. So if I have a Stripe application that's submitting events, how can I get the events that get triggered in my Stripe account start kicking off workflows in Orkes? How would I do that as an example?
I believe we could just define ourselves a webhook, and that'd be it. That'd be one way to do it. You could just contact a webhook, and then it would just listen for that information, and that's it. And when you define the webhook, you just tell it what you want it to be. Again, either in this form, or if you want to paste in the code for the webhook, just paste it in and hit save. And then what you do is in the workflow definition, you would add that in as a step in here. So you'd add that as one of the tasks or one of the components of this workflow, wherever it needed to go in the flow, and with whatever condition you need, you would just click the add button and you would add that component in. And then that would be a step that it would get to and say, at this step in this flow is just always running, waiting to hear for this. And when I hear from it and I get something, then move on to the next step and continue.
Nice. Because I'm thinking about so if I'm in Stripe, right? So for folks that are watching, hopefully you're familiar with Stripe. So what I can do is I can create what's called an event destination. And in my event destination, essentially, I just send it I give it a URL, be like, send events to this place.
Yes.
Right. And, I could filter events. I could, pick and choose. I can have more than one event destination. So just like I'm sure I can have more than one trigger for Orkes, I suppose. Yes. And then I can send those things over to that place.
Yep.
So I'm guessing, like you're saying, essentially all I really need to do is just create webhook, give it some information. And I'm guessing Orkes will give me a URL that I could put into Stripe that I could get,
Yeah, you would essentially have, I believe there would be, to be fair, I haven't configured that part myself previously as part of demos and stuff, but if nothing else, you would have the API call and you would have the post or whatever command you would need to do to invoke that string in the API with an identifier there that would say, this is the webhook that I'm specifically invoking. You'd make that request. It is URL. So you make that request in a post and whatever payload you need to send along with it. And in your workflow, you would just have a step in the workflow where it's needed for your app flow to work. You would have that step in there that's essentially waiting to hear. It's just always just sitting there running or waiting. And when it receives that, then it can move on with the next step. Gotcha. Yeah. So the idea there really is that it's a terrible phrase that we use. It's been around for so long, but a million ways to skin a cat. I love my cats. I would never do that. I would never. Please don't do that. That's not an invitation. I'm sure there's a much better way to say that. But the point I really am trying to make is there's a lot of flexibility here. And if someone says to us, this is how I want to do it, it's almost an easier question for us to ask, to say, rather than talking about functionally how would you build it in the tool, is saying, what are you trying to do? Like, what do you want the outcome of this part of this flow to be, or this part of the application to be? Then let's go take a look and see what's the best way for us to build that out in the platform, because there's going to be a variety of ways to do it. So we usually have a set number of ways we say, do this. And then if there's a problem beyond that, it's like, well, that's not quite having the behavior we need. Okay, then let's try to solve that problem. But it's almost easier to say, what outcome do you want? Then let's go from there. Because like with system design or any design, you can, I've designed networks where I can design it to do a whole bunch of things. Does that mean that's actually the easiest and best way to accomplish it? I know for a fact that 10, 12 years ago, when I was still, midway through my career doing that stuff for longer, that I probably architected some networks that were far more complex than they needed to be just to get the thing that we needed, because I wanted to be able to use certain tools. And it was fun. But I look back at it now, I'm like, dude, I made that so much harder on myself than I needed to. It didn't need to be any of those things, because that's not the job. The job is make this part successful so it works and continues to work and anyone can come and support it. We just know things differently later on.
Gotcha. Developer question.
Okay.
Because I have to ask this question. If bad things happen, right? How do I
bad things don't happen, dude. Everything's fine. Be optimistic.
Everything's fine as when bad things happen, right? Bad things in terms of I have a task that needs to make its own web call, and I get a 500 error, or I can't connect the database, or like any of those types of things, right?
Mhm.
How can I handle those both transient errors and even more critical errors? Like, how do I see that in Orkes, and how do I like deal with that?
Yep. So we're here right now. I just refreshed the execution screen specifically on executing workflows. So I just refreshed that screen. So you're just seeing right here a list of workflows that have been executed. You can see the dates and times here, pretty straightforward. This is the name of the workflow. Here's the workflow ID, just the typical relevant stuff. And here on the right-hand side, you can see what status it ended in or failed in, whatever it happens to be. So if I show you a completed one, I'll just click on the top one. This is the one I've been showing already. Is this zoomed in enough, or should I make it a little bit?
Yeah, no, this is fine.
This is good? Okay. So you start off on the diagram. I've shown you the JSON and a little bit of stuff here, but this is really the page where we want to monitor what happened when this workflow ran. It completed successfully, so yay. But we want to take a look at the steps in that list. There's a variety of things already here that were built in for you. You can see the task list. So here's all the tasks in the order that they run. Here's, you can see what type of task they are. And if we clicked on any one of them, it would bring up the task itself. Like the execution side, this is like post-execution. We're not configuring tasks here. This is just showing us what happened in this stage, but it tells me a summary of what this task was, what the input variables or parameters happen to be, what the output was, if there was any. If there are any logs, they would show up here. Here's the JSON of how that whole process flowed out. Here's the actual definition of the task. So from a simple perspective, this is all this stuff.
Okay.
Let's go over to there's timeline. So you're probably familiar with this. Many people are with app monitoring, like APM type tools, where you have a task timeline and you can see if there was a failure or the runtime. You can look and see at what point in that timeline the issue occurred, which gives you a better sense of like how long things are running, where the problems might be, etc. And a variety of things. Summary. You can also, and we do this internally, you could connect Prometheus and Grafana to this and others as well if you want to inject that, pull that data over into those and make your own dashboards of how things are working. We monitor our systems that way as well. That's a very common way to do it. You can absolutely do that here too. But if I go back to workflow and I'll pick one that failed, for example. So this one failed, and it visually, this is one of the cool parts about this. For anyone, the big red button with the line through it is pretty indicative for most people that, oh, I think I see where the problem is, at least to give you a starting point. But we also put up here at the top the error for you. It tells you right here. So obviously, big warning, here's the runtime exception, unknown host exception, and here's your exact string that you need to be aware of. Name doesn't resolve. And I could click on jump to task. This is really important if you have a very like a widespread workflow. So if you had built a workflow that is like far, far bigger than this, and it's a little visually hard to navigate, or you're scrolling through or zooming out a lot, this is nice because you can just go jump to task, and it's just going to go highlight the task where this problem occurred, and you can just start looking into the details. When it's not a very big workflow like this one is, you can look very quickly and see, okay, where are our problems at? And you could click on it and then say, oh, this one failed, and let's take a look and see what happened. This one says reason for incompletion. The name does not resolve. That's a pretty straightforward one. It just means it's calling something that the system isn't aware of. Input parameters are listed and all the other stuff that we have. That's the easiest thing to do is you just come in here and it will tell you right away. And this isn't a failure situation, but like I said, if you want to connect things like PagerDuty or other sorts of alerting systems you have that are third party, or if you have other platforms, I can't speak to Stripe on this, but if like Stripe has a way to say, if a particular thing happens in your environment, or it's supposed to be invoked and it errors out, that could be related and it could send something back to you. Like you could work with all of that, but in a base Prometheus and Grafana to just have your own dashboarding that of the critical things outside of simply is a workflow working, the things that are more critical, like, but what is that? But if that workflow doesn't work, what is that telling us in the environment? Because it's like, cool, if a workflow fails, okay, good, I know that. But is that failure like, the world's going to end in 10 minutes, we should probably fix this right now? Or is it like, yes, it's a big deal, but if we don't need to go pull someone off of something else they're working on it in the next 30 seconds to fix it, we can wait a few minutes. Like you can build your own dashboarding to get a better sense of like, where is that a problem rather than hunting and pecking through a system like this. Something else that we have built in that's really fun to use is, I'm going to switch back over to definitions because it's related to the building of a workflow. And let me just pull up any one of these to give you a sense. So I'm on this one right here. There's a variety of different tasks. You can start to see right away that this one's an inline task, and it's got some functions and stuff pre-built into it. But the part that I want to call everyone's visual attention to is in the bottom right corner at the bottom of the like menu side is a big green bar that says 0 problems found.
Mhm.
I mean, great. I love when no problems are found when you're configuring a task. But
Sure.
if I open this and you see nothing here, this is something we introduced a few months back in a more UX attractive way. Is this automatic like problem checker? So it's actually looking at the fidelity of your task and your workflow as you are building it. And if
Right.
at any point you create a task that is formatted incorrectly, or you put something the wrong syntax, whatever, this is going to change and tell you how many problems were found. And when you open it, it's just going to tell you, here's exactly where your issues are. So like I was trying to build a workflow the other day for an application to potentially demo here to see what could I do. And I kept coming back to a task that was not working properly. And it turned out that through what I found here and just doing some searching, it turned out that the task I was trying to build out, it was using the term I was using was the wrong way to invoke that task. So it was telling me the error message gives like, that's not the proper syntax. Or if for some reason in the Java the JSON, if I for some reason like deleted a curly brace and it's no longer the right syntax to make this work, I just deleted that. It says 1 problem found. Immediately open this up and it tells me right away that's what the problem is. It just tells me in plain language, hey, can't deserialize this. It's not formatted properly. And it's at position right here. Fix the JSON. So that the whole like visual aid of like where problems are occurring, we're really trying to get it to a place that anyone looking at this along the path is getting really simple feedback that tells them this is exactly what you're dealing with before you even get to a place of saying, does this workflow run? Because you could run it if we didn't tell you anything and you have all these other like log type errors. But if we already know that, why don't we just show it to you? Like, why not? We can do that. So let's just show it to you.
Yeah. And that makes a lot of sense because I'm also thinking too, as I'm building out a workflow, right? Being the type of developer I am, I'm probably going to want to do stuff locally first.
Oh,
right?
100%.
And I'm always thinking about, okay, if I'm running this locally, what is my, build, bug, deploy, test, my
Right.
workflow? I was trying not to say workflow again, but like, what does my local workflow look like, right?
Oh, dude, I get it. Yeah, 100%.
Workflow look like as I'm working through it. And like being able to have some of those, get visual indicators, but as well as those error messages, definitely.
Yeah. And one thing I wanted to call out here, I have said it earlier, but I want to say it in a little bit more clear way than I did earlier. The thing to remember about workflow orchestration in general, and then also in specific with Orkes Conductor, is that Conductor is not where you put your code. Like this is not your code execution platform. You're not opening a task, and this is where you put your service. That's not what this is. To your point about your workflow, at developing an application, you have all these. You open up your IDE with IntelliJ or PyCharm or VS Code, whatever you've got. You open that up and you're working through something. All that stuff is in your local, repo, and you're building that out, and you have all your services here. What you would then do is if you need, and let's say that's on your machine, or it could be on a server in your data center, wherever it happens to be, or it could be in another cloud environment. It could be sitting on Render or something like that, whatever. It doesn't make any difference. All you have to do at that point is there's a standard process using the SDK for a variety of languages. They're all in the docs, from Java, JavaScript into Golang and Python and Clojure, like whatever you want. You just use that SDK to basically register the worker, what we refer to as a worker, on your local machine with Conductor in the cloud. And then that way, your service is just sitting here, and there's a worker locally. And then from when it happens, you then create a task that maps those things together. And then Conductor here is aware that, when this task goes off, I'm invoking this worker that lives wherever it lives, and I just tell it, it's your turn. Go do what you have to do. And when you're done and you tell me successfully, great. Then I move on to the next step in the workflow. So to your point, like, it doesn't really make any difference. We're trying to abstract that stuff away so you can sit back and build all that together. And then when you're ready, you're like, I think I have these services working. You can come here and start building that stuff out piece by piece to say, call this, then call this. And it will start error checking for you along the way to say, you may not have done that quite right, or you might not have done this quite right. Or, hey, all green, it's all thumbs up, and you're the best developer in the world. Yay. Then you move on.
I don't write coded books, so I don't have that type of problem. But that makes a lot of sense because, again, I'm thinking about it as, and I'm glad you clarified that, like, Orkes is not an execution engine, right? Like it's not running your Java code per se. It's not running
Right.
Java or Go or Python. It doesn't have all these SDKs installed to run things for you, but it can notify them. Like, let's say they're running in Kubernetes pods or
Yes.
running a serverless thing or whatever the case is. I can then call out to them and be like, "Hey, it's your turn," right? Like, go ahead and do what
Exactly.
you need to
Yep.
do. And then Orkes also has a way of like passing parameters back and forth, right, and getting responses so that they can flow them through the orchestration. Which
exactly. It's at the end of the day, Orkes is a polyglot. So you write your app in whatever language of your choice happens to be. Ruby on Rails, if you really wanted it to be, or like, I don't know, whatever. Like, go back and make a Fortran app if that's something. If that's your jam, absolutely, COBOL or something. Orkes. I mean, I'm being flip, but at the end of the day, Orkes doesn't care. That's not its job. Its job isn't to understand, the semantics of what coding language you've chosen to run parts of your app. Its job is to understand, when is that supposed to occur? How do I know how to go do it? I make it easier for you to build out, like, the thing we didn't get into that would be like a whole other conversation, is the idea around event handling and like retries and failure modes, all that stuff. We kind of like colloquially refer to that as like the glue code. You don't have to write any of that stuff. It's just built into Conductor, so that all those retries and failures and all that exception handling, timeouts and stuff is all just built into this. So you can manipulate it, but you don't have to deal with it. It's just there. You don't have to worry about building those artifacts yourself as part of your application. You just build your application. This can handle all the other stuff for you to make it simpler. And like I said in the beginning, it's almost like having that blank sheet of paper where you're like, what should I draw today? It's like, what do you want? Because in the space, you sit down and here's all your paper, there's your pencils, your erasers, like everything, all the tools you need are here in front of you. We've taken care of that. You can just go build the thing that you want. As opposed to, I set a blank table. I want to make some Legos. Well, I got to go buy some Legos and I got to get some of this. You don't have to do all that.
Nice. So Jeff, we got about 5 minutes left. So as we're getting closer to the end now, for folks that have just watched this, right, and folks that are like, okay, well, like this is really cool. We love Jeff. Orkes looks great. What do they do now? Like, what do we want to send them? What do you want them to do? Like, what would be their next steps right now?
Well, I am glad you asked. There's a few things.
About this beforehand.
Right. Yeah, totally. There are a few things. If you would like to play with our the Orkes Conductor sandbox, which is visually kind of what you're seeing here, I'll change my screen just so you can see it. I don't know if it's going to share that tab. Let's see here.
We're still looking at the workflow designer. Cool. Did you share the window or did you share like a tab?
I shared a tab, but that's okay.
Okay.
We have the technology. We have the technology. We can fix this. We can fix this very, very quickly. Share my window. Here. Cool. It just popped up. You'll show it on the screen. So this is just a kind of a shameless plug here, but this is orkes.io. This is our homepage. And what I was mentioning earlier in the conversation is this pretty pink button right here in the screen front. This is start for free. You click on that and it's going to take you to this portal. The direct URL is developer.orkescloud.com. I don't need any of you to remember that. Don't even stress it. Just go to orkes.io. Once you get here, click on the big, pretty start for free button. It will take you to this page. Now for me, it's saying log in to continue because I'm already off on the back end, but you would get the typical social auths, like, do you want to use Google or LinkedIn or whatever, or email address? Just sign up. There's no charge or anything. You just sign up. And once you're in, you land back on you can kind of see it right here on the left. Basically the exact same interface I was showing you a minute ago. You get that exact same thing. The key difference here is that, let me log in. You are not there. Perfect. So I'm logged into the developer edition, which is what all of you would get if you got in here. And the thing I want to call out specifically, I know I'm running on time, so I'll chill, is we recently added this feature here at the top called Get Started. So if you are trying to test out something and you want to build a workflow or you want to start your first application, you can create the app. It'll give you all of your keys plus the environmental variables. And importantly, it will give you the ability to pick your language and download a sample project in that language that is already built and ready to use with Conductor. So you don't have to go start a empty Python project or an empty Java project and make sure Maven or Gradle is set up or whatever it happens to be. You just use this, give it a couple pieces of info, hit download, and you'll get that. And you can just start playing with it immediately before you start trying to figure out, how do I go build my app? And so we did this as a way to really make it easy for anyone to like just get started as quick as possible. Then you can worry about the details later. So orkes.io, click start for free, developer edition. You could throw up on the screen if you'd like to the open source stuff as well. So if you're really interested in open source, that's out there. I spend a lot of time with that community. That's completely available. You can see you'll see the Slack and the Discord links at the top. All the things. We got all the things. Or just message me on LinkedIn. Hit me up wherever you want to. I'm on all the socials. I'm happy to talk about this stuff anytime.
Awesome. Well, Jeff, thank you again so much, man. Really appreciate you coming on. I played with Orkes a little bit too. And like I said, like one of my favorite features is just like the visual aspect of it, because I think us being able to communicate better, not just as developers, but across the entire company, like it's just one of those tools that makes that so much nicer for us.
100%.
So for folks that are watching, if you liked what you see, definitely let us know. Go ahead and leave some comments, at the bottom of the videos. Let us know what you thought about it. If you are Orkes customer already, let us know some of the cool things that you're building with Orkes, with Stripe, with, kind of workflows in general, or if you have thoughts about like patterns and practices of building all these types of systems. Definitely interested and love to hear what, you have to say about it. Like Jeff mentioned, he's on LinkedIn and all the social things. I'm also on LinkedIn and all So feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions about like building out some of these integrations, working with webhooks, Orkes, Stripe, anything of the sort. And yeah, I definitely appreciate you all spending some time with us today. So with that being said, I'm going to end this stream. I hope you all have a wonderful day. And we'll see you all next time for another Stripe Developer Office Hours.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.